Hi, this is Blaine Cluten for Cluten Law. So I'm excited about a new episode of false accusation defense tips that I'm going to be releasing very soon. And in anticipation of that release, I'm providing the overview of the tips that I release in that podcast in this video. So the first thing to understand and what I talk about is that in general, when questions come up about false accusations, it's usually in two parts. So the first thing is there's a false accusation that's been made, and the second is that the false accusation couples with some allegation of some legal violation or some bad act. And what I would say generally is if you ever have an allegation of criminal wrongdoing, you need to talk to an attorney about that because there's too many rights at stake. And then the second thing is if there's some other wrongdoing that's alleged, then you may end up needing to talk to an attorney to find out if you are actually in violation of anything or if your behavior was bad, because generally what ends up happening is that they're not sure about how to respond from that point forward, whether they should continue to fight back against what's potentially some wrongdoing or not. So that's the first thing to understand. The second thing now are going to be the tips that I have. The first one is to, generally speaking, you should not be having contact with the accuser. And in this case, it could also be potentially construed as tampering with a witness. And depending on whether there's criminal charges pending, you could be violating some sort of protective order that could already be in place. So no matter what, this ends up, for a lot of reasons that I go into further in the podcast, being a bad idea. The second thing is that you should be gathering as much information as possible, and you should look in and at least consider hiring a private investigator. And I go into further depth about why that's a good idea and what potential benefits you can get in the podcast. It's also great if you can find out other times that your accuser in your case has made other false accusations against other folks, because once you have that to bolster your particular case, you can use that to impeach their credibility. When you are dealing with finding out about the false accusation, one thing to always keep in mind is to limit your emotion and your emotional reaction in the case. And I go into further depth on that idea. You should record information and take notes. So make sure you're taking good notes to fully understand what's going on. And along with that, you should listen. You need to be listening and understand what those accusations actually are against you. The next is don't admit anything and don't sign anything. And certainly don't sign anything unless you have an attorney look it over for you. I usually recommend to limit the scope of other people that are involved. And the reason is, number one, that anybody that you're telling about your case can end up talking to your accuser, and then they can use that information against you, which you certainly don't want. But other people may just not want to be involved in your case. And then the last point is to, as much as possible, reduce stress. I know that this is a really common recommendation, but the more that you can limit your stress in your life by meditation, exercise, praying, whatever outlet you use, your responses then in the false accusation case are going to be more appropriate responses. So this is the high-level overview of the tips that I go through. If you're accused of some sort of wrongdoing, make sure that I always recommend that you get an attorney to make sure that you flush out those issues. This is certainly not recommendations for if you're accused of wrongdoing in a workplace. If you're accused of wrongdoing in a workplace, that's outside the scope of these recommendations. So generally they have to do with what I talked about at the top half, which is the allegations being the twofold issue. If you have further questions, please contact an attorney. Thank you for your time. This is Blaine Cluten for Cluten Law.